Great humans make great leaders. When you are really fully human, which is about emotional management, but also emotional understanding, then what happens is you're able to lead better because you can see people more deeply.
All right, and we are live. Tony Martignetti, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great yourself. What's going on?
Oh, not much. Did I pronounce it all right that time around?
Perfect. Perfect.
Nailed it. All right. No, life is good out here in California. I appreciate you joining all the way from Boston. And so it's fun to make these connections, virtually across the country, and excited to chat with you today. So I thought an interesting place that we could start. I've been consuming a lot of your content, but Flashpoints, maybe something you can lead us with.
Yeah. Yeah. Flashpoints are interesting concepts, right? You haven't really heard much about those in the world. And what they really mean are these moments in our lives that have ignited our gifts into the world. And I use it in my podcast to help to have people reveal themselves through their story and to share the moments that have made them come alive, the moments that have revealed their gifts. And when I think about it, I've had a fair amount of flashpoints myself, and I think that's one of the reasons why I love that concept. It also has a connection to, fire and campfires, which are very much on brand for me. So,
Yeah, what are some of those flashpoint moments that you remember or reflect back on now that have helped you get to what you've been able to accomplish so far?
yeah, I guess it's the first one, but the one of the big ones was realizing that I, needed to leave the corporate world to change the way that leaders are showing up. And I'd been trying to be this finance leader for so long and realized that it wasn't me. It wasn't who I was, and it was holding me back from living a life of my true potential and to feel a fulfilling life. And so when I decided to break free of that identity and to create my own identity that was more aligned with who I am, that was a flashpoint moment to decide to leap out into the unknown and to create a path that I had no idea what I was getting into, but ultimately was more me than I could ever have been.
Yeah, good for you. So what year was that when you made the leap and decided to go all in on yourself?
It was only 6 years ago, which means like it seems like only yesterday, but also there's a lot has happened since then. I've had more flashpoints along the way. So, yeah.
Yeah, when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, man, you got to scroll a ways to be able to see. You've got so many things that you're working on or doing
Yeah.
today. It's like I see the Fast Company executive board member. I see the TEDx speaker. Obviously,
Mm,
your chief inspiration officer of Inspired Purpose, which part of that leadership building is what I want to discuss today. You do the podcast. You got over
mhm.
235 episodes that I saw,
Yeah.
and on top of that, you're a dad. And so, how do you
Yes.
manage all of that?
It's not easy. I'll tell you that much. And a lot of people think that when you start to go on your own and create a path of, building your own business and doing things, it's not an easy path, but it is a path that is really rewarding. And you have to find ways to create the boundaries around all these different things, which means that you have to know when am I going to double down in one area versus another, and know that those boundaries have to be respected. And who has to respect them? You do. It's not about other people per se. Sometimes we're our worst enemy because we tend to say like, well, I'll just do a little more. I'll just work a little harder. I'll stay up a little later and do this. Those are the things that get us in trouble. So to make space for our family, to make space for the things that matter, we have to make sure that we're taking, that those breaks in the workflow to ensure that all the things that we care about are being taken care of. And I'll just share one other thing about this is that I recently was talking to somebody about how the biggest challenges we run into when we get burnt out is that we focus on the what and not the who. The who is what's important, the people who we care about. When you're focused on the doing of the work, the what needs to get done, it's really what gets us so caught up in this cycle of okay, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. But when you think about who am I doing this for, And if the who is your loved ones, sorry, my dog's getting crazy. Another who in my life is my dogs. The who in your life is someone who is doing the work for them, but you're then avoiding spending time with them for that very reason. Then you've got your priorities misaligned, and you have to realize, wait a minute, this isn't serving me or them.
Yeah, I think that's a big topic of conversation for me in the household right now, right? Especially as you decide to go off. I started to join a startup this year and been able to get into entrepreneurship, which has been an amazing, experience for me. But now the who of my two daughters, 2 and 4 years old, it's balance and finding that time to be able to be who they need me to be while also being who the organization needs me to be able to be to lead us to success and help the organization thrive. So, how are you thinking about that? I mean, you're balancing the work life of building all these different entities, inspired to your podcast, to the speaking engagements, but also remaining a dad. And how do you approach that? Like, what principles do you hold that help you so far see, success? And I'm sure there's things you're trying to figure out as a parent as well. Maybe we could talk
Mhm.
about that too. But what's
Yeah.
led you to at least find the balance so far?
Well, yeah, and definitely, I will say that I'm navigating the teen years, so it's not exactly an easy path.
Amen.
And every turn seems to be different. I think one part of this is to create the structure that I say structure creates freedom. When you create structure around the things you're doing, and allow yourself to do one thing during a particular part of your day and to a particular part of your week, it creates a path to ensuring that you do those things in a very focused manner. So what I mean by that is that if we just kind of like react to whatever's showing up, then we're not really going to get very far on the things that are most important. We just react to the things in front of us and not the things that are meaningful. But when you create structure, it allows you to say, okay, this next hour or next 2 hours is on working on writing an article, and I can't be interrupted, because if I do, then I know that it's just going to continually be, it's going to be dragged out. Or if, like I say, that, 3 hours of the weekend are going to be spent on doing something with the family, whatever that may be, then I'm going to spend that time, and it's going to allow me to be freed up mentally and emotionally for them.
Yeah, time blocking is something that definitely continues to be an area of improvement. So we started with the podcast initially, but when you think about the campfire, the virtual campfire that you've created, what led you to want to start that in particular? And maybe some of the biggest takeaways or transformation that you've seen just from starting this type of journey.
It's a great question. And I think my answer now might be slightly different than I would have when I first started. First of all, I never would have thought I would be hosting a podcast. I just wasn't a podcaster, and I didn't, listen to them that much. Very occasionally, but it wasn't something that I was into. And then, the pandemic came along, and I was in this mode of wanting to connect people and bring people together for conversations that were meaningful and for deeper connection, especially when it came to people with different perspectives. And the podcast became the natural progression for creating that space. Instead of having it be a group of people, it was just a one-on-one conversation that would then be broadcast and shared with many people. And so that's really what brought me to this idea of creating the virtual campfire. And the whole idea of the campfire being this place where intimate conversations get told, since they've been told around the campfire since the beginning of human history, or at least the invention of fire. And this desire to want to go deep and understand people on a very personal and human level, not just the surface, not just about, the hi, how are you, how's your day, and what's the, topic of the day, but more about like at the deep down level, what makes you who you are? How did you get where you are? How are you wired? What are the things that are important to you? And that, at the crux, is what got me really interested. And just to wrap this up, what I realized is that why I did it and why I continue to do it is because I desire deep connection with others, and I want them to feel deep connection to themselves. So it's kind of like a dual purpose. is when you connect to yourself and your story, you actually connect better with others.
I've never really thought about it that way before. That's so true. That sense of connection and building the relationship and getting to know someone, but understand what motivates them, what makes them tick, and maybe helping them realize a little bit about themselves in that process because
Yeah.
we don't vocalize it that often. Most
Yeah.
people don't.
When you think about even, this conversation, it's considered co-creation. It's almost like coaching where, you co-create this. This conversation has not existed yet. And we are co-creating it together right now as we speak, my friend. And then that's kind of cool when you think about, where when you're in a process of creating something together versus creating something on your own. And almost every conversation is considered a co creation process. And wouldn't you want it to be something that's more profound and in depth as opposed to just something that is kind of superficial and not so? Yeah.
Yeah, surface level. Well, you had shared something on LinkedIn when, I saw recently, it was a quote though, but it was, in the hustle of our daily lives, it's easy to get caught up in the fast pace and forget to check in with ourselves. And to me, that is so impactful. And I think having these co-creation types of conversations help us get back to checking in on what matters to us because as I'm listening to you, I'm also thinking back on, items in my personal life as well of
Yeah.
why I did this. And you know, does it truly resonate with who I am and what my deep purpose is in life? And to me, that is connection. It's building relationships, it's building rapport with people of all different walks of life, and really understanding how to nurture those relationships to hopefully help one another. And so, I love the concept of the virtual campfire that you're doing. And you said you got a teenager in the household now. Do you incorporate him at all in the work, or is it ever something that crosses the family life, or is it completely separate?
Well, it's an interesting thing you bring up because ever since I've gotten into this work, my son's always like, "Oh, don't coach me, don't," But I can see that he's learned a lot through the work I do. He reads my books, and so it's kind of neat to see him appreciating that, but also seeing the struggles too, which is it's good for him to learn from. Is this the struggles of the ups and downs that go into building a business? He's at the age where he can see that. And I think that's not something I hold back. I want him to understand that that life has its ups and downs, and that's okay.
Mm.
It's about building range and emotional range. And I think that's important.
I think that's great that you're teaching him that, and I think that's needed more and more, especially in today's society. And your books, I want to just double click on that a little bit. Are they similar in nature? I think the one that I saw most recently was kind of taking away from the lessons that you've learned from doing the podcast, but maybe you can educate the listeners a little bit about what each one revolve around and
Sure.
plug them a little bit.
I'm happy to. The first book was called Climbing the Right Mountain. And the essence of the book is, besides a few stories about climbing mountains, really, is this concept of, how do you define success on your own terms? How do we,
Mm.
go through our lives of trying to figure out what we want, but ensuring that we do it on based on what we want, not what other people want for us. And also checking in with ourselves along that way. As we climb the mountain, are we ensuring that we're doing it for the right reasons, that we've chosen the right path? And sometimes we're on the right path. We've forgotten what it was we wanted in the first place. So we need a refresher. So sometimes you pause and think, well, yeah, why I decided to become, an architect. I wanted to be an architect. That is because I've always been fascinated with, there is a sense of like, reconnecting with your passion that comes along with that, but also knowing what you need to navigate the next path forward.
So let me ask you, how do you define success in 2024? Like, how are
Yeah.
you looking at it as we approach the new year and what you've done already to start?
This is a great segue to the next book, but I would say for me, success is about authentically connecting and intentionally connecting with people in a way that understands what is driving them. And to know that, since this is the work that I've now seen is what I'm meant for, is to foster deeper connections in the workplace and beyond. I realized that I have to make sure I take my own medicine, if you will. And that means connecting with people who I haven't talked to in a while or I have never met and broaden my reach by having conversations with people and get to understand them and listen with intention. So that's my goal.
Well, you're doing so and doing this, so thank
Yeah.
you. I know we really know each other, met, on LinkedIn recently, but
Mm.
I appreciate you being willing to have this conversation. And one thing that I'm thinking about a lot lately that I'd love to get your perspective on is how do you define success, especially the teenage years, but being a parent?
If they're still living at the age of 15, 16, you're doing well. The best thing I can say is that you have children who care for others and that they're kind to others. Whether or not they are knocking it out of the park in their, sports and, education, all those things, that's all fantastic and great. But the success is how are they being? Just like I say in the book about how are you being, not what are you doing. And you want the same thing for your children, is to make sure that they're being the type of person you can be proud of. Just like you would be proud of people saying, well, when I think of, Brian, I think of a person who's kind, gentle, and someone who really wants to do right in anything he does, like whatever that might be. You want them to be thinking positively and not someone who, like, he's a backstabber who always thinks about himself, that kind of thing. If that's the mentality that you leave them with.
Yeah, we just want to raise good people. I forget what your last episode was, the gentleman, but I think it was Jay Frost, if I'm remembering this correctly. But talking about, you can't be a good leader without being a good person, or something to. I'm paraphrasing now, but I think it's a good concept that we need more good people in the world today.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Jerry Colonna. Actually, was one of the episodes where we talked about great humans make great leaders, and I think that episode was really powerful because for me, first of all, Jerry's a very very deep and an empathetic human being, and I say that in meaning that his book Reunion is just mind blowing in terms of how it approaches, where we need to be in terms of communion with other people. But the conversation went down this path of how sometimes the darkest parts of who we are show up because we have these times when we can't understand and deal with our emotions. We have to kind of see our emotions on a level that other people can't see. They can see them, but we can't. So we have to get in tune with our emotions. And so when you are really fully human, which is about emotional management, but also emotional understanding, then what happens is you're able to lead better because you can see people more deeply. It's not about being a softie or being someone who can just, be an emotional mess. It's about understanding emotions and be able to regulate them, work with them, and feel them.
How do you go about teaching that to your children? Because I think those are really important life skills and lessons that they need to learn, and probably early and often. But how do you think about it?
I mean, the starting point and probably the easiest part of this, actually easy is probably not the right word. I would say the best way to start is to lead by example, to not hold back your emotions, to not stifle yourself. When you think back to some of the parents that we had or the adults we had as children who like stuffed down all their emotions and just try to be that stoic person, or instead maybe yelled at it all the time because they were trying to lashing out, but instead manage their emotions in a way that allowed people to say, hey, I'm feeling hurt, and did it in a way that was more aligned with a more calm and gentle manner. That gives the children a model to go by, to understand, oh, that's how this gets done. That's how you verbalize and control and express emotions. And the model that has now been given to me is someone who I care about deeply.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you talk about leading by example. And I've heard you talk about traits, I believe, of inspiring leaders.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good segue. What are some of those traits that can really lead by example, both at home and also in the workplace as a leader?
The first one that I always think about because it comes to mind almost immediately is balance. And I know you're going to be like balance, like work life balance. No, it's about knowing that there's a polarity in everything we do. Not everything requires you to be forceful or commanding. Sometimes it does. So as leaders, we need to find that balance and actually think about it in the context of Buddhism. There's an eightfold path that they talk about where you strike that right balance between being mindful of what's happening and being very clear of this is what I need to do. When Buddha was traveling his path, he decided to go and like starve himself. And then he had come from this place of being overindulgent. But the realization is it's like striking the balance means being right in the middle and finding out like, well, it's not about starving ourselves. It's not about overindulging. It's about finding that way to be in the middle and finding that simple way to strike the balance. And I think leaders have to find that way to know how to be soft and hard at the same time. And what I mean by that is like how you're treating people. Sometimes people need a little bit of a challenge, but they need it also from a compassionate way. So that's one of them. And then another one that I always love sharing is listening is one of the most powerful things an inspire leader can do is just listening, but not just on the surface. You have to listen with your whole body and know that listening with your whole body means that you're being as present as possible in the listening process. Yeah.
That's a big one, presence, especially when you've got so many things on your plate. You're trying to achieve so many, items at once, and as things come inbound to you, you want to respond, you want to, listen to your team, of course, and then but you're thinking about the 15, 20 other things that you're juggling at that same moment. But how do you really be present is
Yeah.
something that I think anybody that wants to be a good leader should continue to work on, and one that I'm glad you brought up. Any others that really hit home that you think you should share?
Well, I would say the flip side of listening is communicating and knowing that, the words we choose to use when we communicate with others is so important. So choosing your words wisely. I often say, I use the quote from what's his name now, being impeccable with your word is so important from, God, I can't remember his name now, The Alchemist. And I think that is really powerful, like making sure you choose words that are going to resonate with the people around you, but also making sure you've chosen the right tone about how you're going to approach people because communication is key and it should not be taken so lightly.
And when you're working with these leaders, maybe tell me a little bit more about that. Like how, first of all, engage with them. And when somebody comes to, hire you, what is it that they're searching for? Is there a consistent theme to it? Is it different for everyone? Like, what are you helping them accomplish?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, there are some variety. There's some variety, but I would say the key, like the biggest thing people come to me with is this feeling of like, I want to get it right. I want to make an impact. There's things that I feel like I could do much better. And, the thing I'm concerned about most of all is not connecting well with the people around me and just feeling overwhelmed with all of the things that are going on. So we had this conversation earlier about, the overwhelm that we get when there's a lot of things on our plate. So the way I like to think about it is I help those people to create the impact that they want to make a meaningful contribution, which I think all of us really want is to make a meaningful contribution in the world and in the work we do, but without all of the burnout. Now, we can't eliminate the burnout, but we can manage it to an extent that it's at least livable, right? And I think the key thing is that we need to figure out how do we understand what's most important and how do we also create the tools that will help us to stay above all the noise.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up. Is there when somebody, comes to you through change, I guess they want to have those flashpoints probably as I
Yeah.
think through what we've discussed. What typically leads them to that aha moment? Is there any question that you've seen work well that people should be just asking themselves in general that, really help people as they're going through this journey of growth? Or I'm trying to picture myself here, and selfishly, it's like, how do I try to find that next flashpoint? And what question should I be asking to myself as a leader of the organization, and being able to keep that top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point because sometimes these flashpoints they find us, we don't find them. And what I mean by that is that like you'll be sitting in your pattern, stuck in your pattern of life, and all of a sudden you realize I can't continue with this any longer. For some reason, something's happened to me, or something's in my world has happened that has now caused me to have to really think deeply about whether or not I can continue on this path. And that might be, this feeling of like, I'm starting to wake up and not really feel connected to the things I'm doing. So there's that sense of like feeling of loss, feeling of disconnect. Or, and this is one of those questions I often ask in coaching, is this idea that like, what are you tolerating that you shouldn't be? And what I love about that question is because sometimes that is the jolt that people need, is to say, well, gosh, I've been putting up with a lot about this particular project or this particular environment, and I don't know why I do. And maybe there's something about that which is telling me it's time for me to make a change about that, because tolerating stuff is what we do when we're stuck in a pattern.
Definitely had me thinking a little bit.
Hmm.
What about when you're working with individuals? Are there any books that you recommend for, maybe aspiring leaders, and any that you have been reading recently that you'd recommend to any leaders out there looking to continue to progress?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I will say I just recently, I'll mention two books because one I'm reading right now and I'm just blown away by it. It's called Generations it's Gene Twang. Fantastic book. And the reason why is because it really gives a historical view and also a very deep dive on understanding the generations. And what I think is really cool about that is because you think about this time and place where we are, understanding the different generations is actually a key advantage to people who are in the workplace right now. So it's not necessarily the type of book you probably expected, but if you want to understand your children, what they're going through right now, it's blew my mind. So great book.
Two questions to follow up on that. So, I guess first, as you're raising a different generation than I am, but what are you most excited for with this generation?
Well, what I'm most excited about is what they're going to teach us about how to work and how to live and how to look at life in general. So I think there's something about that which is really powerful. And I think for people who are like resistant to that, I mean, we have to just get on board and figure out also how can we help them by sharing our own experiences. One of the things that is in the book that's interesting is it shares this idea that like every generation thinks that the next generation is soft. Like they got it so easy. Look at, I have walked barefoot into, in the snow to get to work, get to school every day. And the reality is it's true, but that's all because of the work that we put in to get there. And that's all we're here for, really, is to serve the next generation in some way, to advance society, to advance the human race in a way that helps the next generation to move the ball, to move the needle in different to the next level. So when you think about it, is the best thing we can do is to leave the world better than we found it, and to make sure that we're putting things in the right place for the next generation to take the ball and even advancing it further so that their generation can be good ancestors for the next generation.
It's a great response. What about what keeps you up at night
Oh my
with
gosh.
this next generation, especially the teenage years that you're going through? Some you
Yes.
might not want to disclose, but yeah, some you can.
Well, besides my son, because it's school week, he's up. He's had sleepovers this week. So, no, I'm kidding. What keeps me up is worrying about their mental state. Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I'm just speaking in general. I think that I've heard from other people who have told me the same thing. There's a lot of concerns about how well they're adapting to social media, to the way that they connect. They don't necessarily have the same level of connection that we did. I mean, just to give you an example, when I was a kid, we used to be out and playing outside like 24/7. I mean, literally our parents didn't even worry about it. It was just one of those situations where like we would be home for dinner and that's all that they cared about is making sure we're back in time for dinner. Nowadays, kids spend a lot of time indoors. They spend a lot of time, in structured environments, whether it be going to sports, coming home. It's not like it was back in the day when we had a lot of free time in nature.
How do you try to help that at home? Like, are you intentional about taking your son out or maybe going, for a walk or telling them to go outside and play? And yeah, because I feel like now we're so connected. The information is so right at your fingertips of knowing where they're at, of knowing what they're doing, of seeing who they're with, right? I remember just riding your bike and just seeing how far you can go and hoping that
Yeah,
you don't get caught for how far you went, you know? And now
exactly.
it's like I couldn't even imagine that. So, yeah, what are you
Yeah,
doing to get them out?
you can only influence so far. I mean, especially as they come into the teenage
Mhm.
years, you want to make sure that they have that social connection that
Right.
they're looking for, and you don't want to drive them away from their friends, and kind of put them into structured fun with your dad or your mom. But the idea is that whenever we can, we try to do something that is more outdoorsy and connected to the just getting fresh air and doing things that are more active in nature, because I think they have to see that there is another way. There is another way to live life beyond the screens, beyond just the structured things that a lot of not just blame schools, but like the ways that things have kind of come along. It seems like they're shuffled along to all these different structured events, and that's great. But at the same time, has its disadvantages too.
Yeah, that's one. That trying to keep them connected with the outside world versus just,
Yeah.
staring and looking at the screens. Well, thank you for that. And I guess unsolicited or solicited at this point, parenting advice for somebody at my stage a little bit earlier on. If you were to reflect back on those, tough years, 2, 4 years old,
Mhm.
any things that I should be thinking about as well at the home?
I'll tell you about this, and this is gonna hit a chord for me because both my parents have passed. My dad, when he had an aneurysm, he said something to me. His After his aneurysm, he was a little bit not connected to all the things. His mind was a little lost, but he said something to me that was really beautiful. And he said, cherish the moments that you have because they're only young once, and realize that it'll be gone in a blink, and you'll wish you could have more time with them. And when he said that to me, I was just like an emotional wreck, because it was at that time when I was really so focused on the work being the focus. That was it. I was so addicted to the titles at the time and to the work, and hearing him say that was cut through to me and said, yeah, here he is, this person who at the moment was having real mental challenges. He couldn't connect the dots because his mind was, all out of sorts. It's like having a stroke. But he said something that was like so profoundly deep and real and right.
Well, that is a beautiful way, I think, to sign off on this conversation. And thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry for your losses. And yeah, we can only hope to cherish those moments because they're so fleeting. They're so short in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things. So this has been a fun conversation. Really appreciate your words of wisdom. If people are looking to learn more from you, obviously follow along on LinkedIn, but where else could we point them to be able to see your journey?
Well, the best place is to be my website, which is ipurposepartners.com. That's I as in just the letter I, not the I. And if you go there, you'll find out all types of fun information. Sign up for my newsletter, which I share a lot of cool things on that, the newsletter. And you can find out about my books, my podcasts, and all the fun stuff there.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely make sure to link those. And Tony, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on today. It was a fun conversation.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, Tony. Well, thank you.
It was cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know if that's what you're anticipating or expecting, but it was fun for me to get to learn a little bit about you and what makes you tick and what you're up to. And I'm sure people will pull some nuggets of good information on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy. I'm happy if you're happy, and I think that's the key thing is having a conversation that other people want to listen to and get little nuggets out of. That's the key thing. So I never come
Yeah.
on to like feel like I have to prove anything.
Yeah, no, that's never the intention. What about anybody you think I should also reach out to that you've interviewed that were fun guests that you think would be cool to talk about this, knowing, kind of a little bit of what I'm up to and leaning?
Oh my gosh, there's like a million people I could think about. I mean, honestly, it's almost like you pick your poison. And there's, if you look at my website list, I mean, if you looked at the list, you can just choose anyone, and I'm happy to make an introduction. But I will think of someone particularly that comes to mind. I haven't thought of him yet, but I will come back to you.
Yeah, I
Okay?
appreciate that. And if there's anything I can do to support you, obviously
Yeah,
blast this. I'll put some content together and share it with you if you want to take a look. And just thank you, especially at
you're
this
so
early
welcome.
stage of doing this. You know how important it is once you're starting. So this means a lot to me, and just
You're welcome.
good to get to know you further.
Same here. Well, there is one person I just thought of just that would be great, and I think you'd really enjoy the conversation. His name is Mark Silverman.
Okay.
If you want to
Do a
reach out
little
to him and just say,
research.
"Hey, Tony mentioned you. Love to have a chat." Mark, he has a podcast called Mastering Midlife, and I think now it's called Rising Leader because he changed the name. But he's just a fantastic guy, and he's also got an amazing backstory. So, and he's a dad. He's got just an interesting story to share. So I think he'd be worth having on your show.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I'll
Yeah,
definitely reach out and let them know that we chatted. And I'm probably running about 3 to 4 weeks, getting the episodes out. So obviously, I'll keep you privy to the timeline as we're going through this. But yeah, seriously, thanks again.
of course. My pleasure. All right, Brian, take care.
All right, Tony. Have a great day.